All right. Well, we are here in this session today to celebrate the Green Award winners and finalists. And so we're happy that we could have one author, at least from each of the four articles here with us today to share some of their research findings. Just to kind of clarify, the Paul Green Award, if you're not familiar with it, it recognizes the best Journal of Marketing Research article published in the most recent calendar year. And particularly that shows or demonstrates the most potential to contribute to the practice of marketing research and marketing. And so I just wanted to kind of highlight the purpose and the intention of the award. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Aradhana Krishna, our first presenter, for her paper on gender still matters in the business school. And I just have to say, I don't know if any of you are, watching the Barbie movie that's out, but when I was reading her title again today, I'm thinking, wow, gender matters, and had Barbie a little bit more salient in my background. But I do want to let you know, you can feel free to ask questions, in the chat, and we'll get to those after her presentation. And then we should also have some time at the end of all the presentations. So you can either, ask questions in the chat, and we'll talk about them after each individual presentation as time allows, or else shift over. So without further ado, Aradhana, I'm going to give you the floor, and I think you should hopefully be able to share screen as well, if you'd like.
Oh, sure. So thanks so much, Karen. In fact, as soon as you mentioned the Barbie movie, I realized I'm so glad I wore a pink scarf here. So that totally matches. So anyway, let me share my screen and all right. So this is a paper that I have worked on with Yaseem Orhan, and she's not here today, but I feel really privileged to present this as a finalist, and to also, I'm really looking forward to hearing the other presentations, and I think it just matters a lot to us that we are with such a great slate of people in this Green Award finalist and winner. So I'm very happy to be here. Okay, so in terms of this paper means a lot to both of us, and it looks at academic achievement gaps between men and women in business school. So when do men do better? When do women do better? Why? And we have data from the Michigan Ross BBA program. And so since it is very focused on business school, it's very pertinent to all of us today. So first, some background, like, why did I do this? Why did I even get into it? And so this is something, gender differences have been something that I have been looking at since I was a young girl. And I can recall when I was 9 years old, yes, 9, which seems like 100 years ago. And my parents were visiting a friend whose son had topped the entrance exam for the engineering colleges in India. And they congratulated the parents. And then the mom says, don't congratulate me. He gets his brains from the dad. And, that really bothered me. She was just dismissing her role and saying, like, that the brainy person is the father in the house. And this was not isolated as an incident. So 2 years later, my mother was looking at a shopping list on her close friend's refrigerator door, where the friend had just added the total price, just looked at what she had purchased and added the total price. And so my mom was just looking at it, and her friend covers this list and she says, oh no, don't see this. I can't add well. My husband does the finances. So, so it just bothered me a lot that women were, sort of apologizing for math and saying we don't know math. And then I started reading all these articles about differences between men and women in STEM courses. And I got very interested in this topic. And I also started looking at, papers which had been written on this. And so let's see what was happening at this time as well. So firstly, in terms of the real world, I was noticing that there is a substantial gender parity in careers and earnings in management occupations. So there was a systematic gap, and across management jobs in the US, women earn 77 cents for every dollar earned by men. And much of this discrepancy has been shown to result from the fact that the ratio of women is lower in the high-paying careers. And so this low level of female participation in high-paying careers is undesirable in many ways, and also because it handicaps economic growth. And it, brings about an undesirable work culture, undesirable outcomes for women, of course, who are in these companies. And so this is the problem that companies have been paying attention to and trying to tackle. So now, why do business schools matter? Business schools are the pipeline to management jobs. And companies, which hire from business schools lament this leaky pipeline. So they say the problem is the pipeline. And if you ask the recruiters, they say, we don't have a large pool of well-trained women to choose from because women do not take the academic paths that lead to these promotions. Now, we as business school train this pool of talent, and since we do, we should take a close look at this conjecture. And there are some findings consistent with this. And so this paper, which I have cited here, Bertrand, Golden, and Katz, they look into earnings and promotion disparities of Chicago Booth MBAs after graduation, and they do find gender disparities in GPA and in how many finance courses students take. And they say this partially explains career prospects and earnings. So this result suggests disparities, but it's not really taking a deep look at it. And so most of the work on this has been in STEM courses, and typically in STEM courses, there is an underrepresentation of female students, and this is cited as the reason why females don't perform well. Okay, so we take some insights from here, but we do much more. So we have a fantastic data set. So this is a data set from the University of Michigan, and we have a data set of 6,312 undergrad students across 15 cohorts across 2005 to 2018 graduating classes. We have their high school GPA, high school calculus exposure, AP grades, SAT, ACT scores, primary language, family income, education, student ethnicity, etc. Then we have all the courses and grades while at the university. And then we have instructor demographics, who taught all the courses. So we have a really rich data set that we can use. And so what do we look at? Our first goal is to document academic performance disparities across men and women, and we document very large gender performance disparities. And for comparison with previous literature, we measure standardized deviations, standardized variations. So in quantitative introductory courses, we find that women do worse than men, even after controlling for a very rich set of factors, including high school GPA, SAT, ACT scores, family background, etc. That means even when women and men had the same background, the same GPA, same SAT, ACT, at the BBA undergrad core quantitative courses, they did worse than men, which was astounding to us. In finance, their grades are a third of a standard deviation lower, and the effect across all quantitative courses is about 11% of a standard deviation. And so if we compare to previous work in STEM, there it's been about 10 to 15% of a standard deviation. So finance is really high at 33%. And in the what we call the POET courses, the less quantitative courses, we find that men do worse than women, and on average 23% of a standard deviation. So the next question becomes why? Like, what are some plausible reasons for this? And that's what we start looking at. What is a plausible mechanism? And the previous literature has discussed three mechanisms, mostly based on extant theories or correlational evidence. And the first two stem from the student side. So one explanation can be that students may have innate differences in ability or preference, and that is the reason for this. But if that's the case, it doesn't really matter because the school culture, etc., doesn't matter. This is what they want. On the other hand, it can also be due to student beliefs and expectation. So student expectations of success, ability, belonging may shape their scholarly interest, motivation, and performance. So they think, we just cannot do well in math. We are not supposed to do well in math or quantitative courses, and that can affect performance. And these beliefs may be self-fulfilling, even if they are inaccurate. Okay, so if women believe they cannot succeed in finance, such beliefs may impact their performance. And such gendered beliefs are often fed by stereotypes in the society at large. And if they stem from these stereotypes, research suggests that they can be challenged by salient counterexamples. And so, for example, in the context of business subjects like finance, such examples can be like a successful mother who works in finance, a female finance professor, a female chief financial officer who's an alum or a mentor. Now, the last mechanism can be the faculty side. So there is a grading bias where the instructor favors men over women. And we look for that as well. Now, we are able to improve upon previous correlational evidence because we do a survey among undergraduates. In fact, we do multiple surveys among undergraduates, and these surveys show that students report gender stereotypical expectations of performance. So they do have gender stereotypical expectations of performance. So, for example, 36% of the responses in our survey cited gender stereotype. Then we show a causal relationship between instructor gender and gender performance difference. And we find that gender performance difference is reduced if the instructors are female. And we are able to do this for two reasons. One is because we have quasi-random student instructor assignment, which eliminates a student selection concern. So in other words, in the core classes, in the BBA core classes, students are assigned to instructors. So it's not as if females can choose a female instructor. So they don't choose their own instructor, they're assigned. So there's randomized assignment. And then we also eliminate an aggregation bias, which we discuss in detail in the paper. We find that female instructors increase female students' grade, interest, and performance expectations. And there is no effect on the grades of the male students if they have female instructors. And which students benefit most? It's the students with the middle to high initial math aptitude. So these are the people who benefit most. We also find evidence to suggest that instructor bias is not a likely factor for this. And we show that first we test whether the impact of the instructor gender on grades is larger in courses where the instructors have more discretion over grades. So for example, higher class participation, that doesn't happen. And secondly, in a survey of undergraduates, men and women do not report being treated differently. And we also find in a survey that female instructors are rated as more inspirational by their female students in quantitative classes. So those are the explanations, but what is the takeaway? Like, what do we tell our deans? And we got calls from many deans after this paper came out. And so what to tell your dean? What to tell your dean is women's performance in the female students' performance in quantitative classes is malleable, and it responds to instructor gender. And findings also point to the detrimental role of beliefs held by students most likely formed outside the business school. And therefore, it's really important to have representation at the top. So females at the top in quant courses. And so business schools can make a difference with role models, not only instructors, but bring in female alumni, have other students who are role models, etc. And the other thing is early intervention matters. So early grades shape the academic path, which then shape career paths. And we need to understand why women. So there are other things which need to be done in the future, which our results point to. Like, we need to understand better why women have higher excitement, interest in certain courses versus others, and higher expectation of performance when they are taught by female instructors. Like, what does a successful exemplar do? Does it make them feel like they belong? Does it make them feel more comfortable speaking up? Why is this happening? And we know that female professors suffer from bias in student evaluation. There's separate data to show that. And so we need to look more into that so that female professors in quantitative courses don't suffer. We need those role models. And we don't have data on ethnicity, enough data on ethnicity for professors, and that in itself is a problem. So we need to tackle that as well. So the results of this paper should not be taken sort of to inform school policies in a vacuum. We need to look more broadly. And so the broad goal of our paper is to inspire more questions in the domain of gender performance differences and to inspire like more work in this area.
Wow. Fantastic. Thank you, Aradhana. I love that paper. I mean, I don't love the findings per se, right? But I love that you did the research to understand, where those differences are occurring and potentially, how we can have those better role models to hopefully overcome the differences that we're seeing, in our business schools even today. So any questions? I don't see anything in the chat right now, but any questions specifically that you wanted to, you can unmute and ask them yourself also. But I'm glad that deans are reaching out, right? And that we're at least kind of paying attention and saying, what can we do, right? How can we try to overcome this? I think that's really important. Okay, if no further questions, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. Thank you again, Aradhana, for being with us and sharing your research today. Another finalist that we had was a team of Yufeng Huang, Paul Ellickson, and Mitchell Lovett. And Mitch is actually going to, I believe, share their research with us today on learning to set prices. So Mitch, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. I believe you should be able to share screen.
Yep, just 1 second.
I think that's such a simple title too, right? I'm like, learning to set prices, right? So the core part of marketing. So go ahead, Mitch, I'll turn it over. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So first of all, it's great to be here and hear Aradhana and company's research, as well as looking forward to hearing some of the papers going forward in this finalists and winner session. Very happy to be selected with my co-authors Yufeng Huang and Paul Ellickson to present this. So I'm going to be talking about learning to set prices. The study is, I think the title is pretty straightforward for that. The starting point for this was thinking about two very contrasting views on pricing practices. On the one hand, coming from kind of a quant background, the classical economic rationality is kind of the way we tend to model as if behavior, which has firms setting optimal prices in kind of this hyper-rational way. And so that's a pretty sharp contrast to some of the kind of survey evidence and more behavioralist results that have been coming through, especially recently, that suggest bounded rationality with limited information, limited attention, limited capacity to set optimal prices. And that could arise from a variety of barriers like menu costs and so forth, but it seems that firms just aren't doing this. And surveys indicate prices are being set in suboptimal routines like cost plus style approaches. But there's limited observational evidence that doesn't impose models or use surveys to collect this kind of framework. And so we wanted to understand how they're learning and whether that learning leads to kind of the optimality of the decision making. So we identified a setting to study this, a new market where we could see variation in experience and in setting the prices to related products over time. And so the experiences of having different levels of experience of the market players initially is important, but also being able to sort of see them from the start of the process, setting prices. And then the other part of this is we needed to be able to see cost data and in that process be able to observe in some way what the optimal prices should be. So we identified a setting, Washington state liquor deregulation, where grocers started selling liquor when it was deregulated. And that led to a mix of different chains that started selling liquor in Washington, some of which had previously sold liquor in other states and others that hadn't had that experience in the past. And we see that data from the start, from right when the deregulation begins. In fact, we see the sales even before deregulation happens when it was a public entity selling liquor. So we see this important variation in types of chains that are selling in terms of their experience. But we also see that Washington State has this interesting phenomena that the tastes there seem to have a meaningful difference from other states, which would lead to potential needing to learn those tastes in order to set prices within Washington State. So you couldn't just take prices in other states and apply them in this state. So what do we do here? So we carefully minimize our use of model assumptions. And the idea there is to avoid imposing a model that constrains the answers we might get. And so we test whether and how firms learn without imposing a model. And we estimate demand then, so not the supply side, but demand using aggregate data and micro moments that allow us to carefully tease out kind of the responsiveness to price that consumers have, as well as kind of the tastes for different kinds of liquor products. And that information is essential to evaluating the optimality of the pricing decisions, which we do at the end of the period, as well as understanding aspects of the trajectory of learning that ultimately we're going to be sort of plotting for you. So the idea is that by looking at the demand system, we can then evaluate what optimal prices should be. And from those optimal prices, what they should be, we can evaluate the difference between what they actually did and what they should have done to see the size of mistakes and see how those mistakes changed over time. And then evaluate at the end whether or not those decisions matched up with kind of optimal. So I'm going to go through three, I guess, core empirical findings from the study. The first finding is that retailers make meaningful mistakes at the beginning, and those mistakes are large enough that you would care about these from a profitability standpoint. But they learn to set more profitable prices over time. And I'm going to show you a graph that is like kind of our key graph from the study. And what you can see on the left side are price gaps, and on the right side are profit gaps. And in both, you see over time the changes in these gaps. So if you just look at the profit gap figure on the right first, you can see that at the beginning you had almost an average of 10% profit gap between the optimal and what they actually did initially. And over time, you can see that profit gap decreasing and getting close to the optimal at the end, and actually matching the optimal up to our error by the end of the period. On the price gap, you can see actually how that played out, that initially you had this higher percentage price gap, that the distance on average declines to essentially zero, but the variation in prices also shrink over time. And that both of those facets reflect learning about the full range of products over time, as well as getting kind of the average tastes right. So firms did seem to learn. They adjust their prices in correspondence to that learning and improve their profits dramatically over the period. So those profitability increases, we were able to measure how closely they seem to be tied to increasingly capturing demand fundamentals. So the tastes of consumers. And I want to show you two pictures of what this looks like and to sort of capture the idea. Now in this, we're kind of doing, if you will, a kind of diff and diff type approach. It's not actually a diff and diff, but here on the right side, you can see this is what other states had in terms of the correlation between price and demand shocks. So if they're responding to demand shocks, they're using the new information that's available from those demand shocks and adjusting prices. And so in other states, those demand shocks aren't really giving them much information. And so there's almost no responsiveness to those demand shocks. But in Washington State, you can see there's meaningful responsiveness at the beginning that declines over time to a much lower level of responsiveness. This next graph shows directly the relationship between the price and the underlying demand primitive for consumer taste for the product. And what you would expect in this graph would be for Washington State would be kind of an increasing relationship over time as the firm is able to set prices that reflect that demand. In other states, you can see that it doesn't increase, it's very flat throughout. And you see the pattern very clearly in Washington State, where over time, they're increasingly incorporating those demand fundamentals. And when they incorporate those demand fundamentals, that leads to kind of a bias in those coefficients that increases the coefficient towards zero in this case. And so you see the higher level towards the end. So these two charts give a sense of the fact that these firms are increasingly incorporating demand fundamentals and less so actually the information in demand shocks. And that's consistent with kind of a typical Bayesian interpretation of learning in the marketplace. That interpretation then allows us to say, that they're learning in this setting. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is just that those prices we actually test whether they seem to converge to the canonical profit maximizing solutions, and they do, and they get essentially there within 2 years. So the speed of convergence towards optimality is reasonably fast for a brand new market. In fact, we cut about a third of the mistake or the loss in profits within the first 3 months. And so the firms are learning, they get to optimal, and they do that in a way that reflects their incorporating information about the environment, and in particular, learning about these demand fundamentals. And so this is, we understand it, the first observational demonstration of this kind of learning about price setting without imposing how the firms are learning. So some key implications from this. First, the managers learn to be optimal. They do it relatively quickly. And this suggests that the learning capabilities are a critical asset to the profitability of firms. Now, the second piece of this is that what we find by contrasting the firms that have the experience with those that have less experience, we find that the pricing domain expertise from one state to another transfers. So there's some transfer between these settings, with the more experienced firms actually having better initial price setting and lower profit, lower mistakes that, diminishes the mistakes in terms of impact on profit. So that's kind of important because it means that they have understanding of what's going on, not just kind of the transferring the prices directly. They understand the basis of the price setting. It suggests firms have the ability to develop these dynamic capabilities that respond to new market phenomena and transfer those capabilities in order to respond to the phenomenon. The next thing is that what we find is what they're learning about is more complex than is typically assumed in learning models. So the typical thing sort of has a pretty simple demand primitive. And what we find is actually it's much closer to the kind of sophistication we teach in our marketing courses, where firms are learning about, or managers are learning about, kind of the distribution of tastes and price sensitivities, in the sense of, like, you can think about segments and, what is this customer like? How price sensitive are they? What kind of products are they focused on? And because firms seem to have this level of sophistication, as a firm, you want to think about your competitors as also having that sophistication, which suggests that competition is really in trying to generate profits via these dynamic capabilities. Like that's where the competition is really centered with this, learning to set prices. So we think this is really an exciting area. The paper is one that was a lot of fun to work on and learn about how firms are learning to set prices.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mitch, for sharing your findings today with us and with this group. For congratulations again as being a finalist for the Green Award. I'm looking in the chat to see if there's any questions, or again, I'll kind of open up to the audience if anyone would like to come off mute and ask a question for Mitch. Oh, we're happy to have a moment, but fascinating how we're seeing that learning happening, both with the more experienced kind of firms and also with the competitors you're saying, can be the learners as well. So some good findings, again, kind of tying into that, substantive practical implications is what the Green Award represents. So, yes, a question.
Yeah, may I ask a quick question?
Of course.
Karen? Yeah, so first of all, Mitch, congratulations on the award. This is a fantastic paper. I remember listening to this paper in multiple conferences, so it's a wonderful paper to read and also learn from. So my question is about heterogeneity. Like in your research, did you find some firms learn faster, some firms learn slower? Which type of firms are fast learners? Is there something interesting about heterogeneity that you found?
Yeah, so we were able to capture a small number of distinct firms in the analysis because of the constraint in Washington State. And in there, what we find is the experienced firms start off seeming to have a better model of how to think about kind of setting prices. You can think of it as like they understand kind of the way demand fundamentals are affecting, but they must have done some research or something to understand that the market is different in Washington State, because actually the tastes are different there. And so they start off better, but other firms catch up relatively quickly. And so it's not that, they start off better and they also converge dramatically faster. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the question.
Excellent. Yes, thank you for the question. And if any of you, I know I do see one in the chat for Aradhana, but I'm going to kind of pause on that for now. I think maybe come back to that at the end of all the presentations, if that's okay for everyone. So there's no other questions. I'm going to turn it over to our third presenter from the finalists, and then we do have, of course, the winners presenting after this. So I'm happy to introduce Hrystyna Nikolova and her co-author Gorgana Nenkov as well. And Hrystyna is going to be presenting their paper, We Succeeded Together, Now What? Relationship Power and Sequential Decisions in Couples' Joint Goal Pursuits. I might have a personal preference, but I really find this paper very interesting, even kind of as it applies to my own personal life and our decision making. So happy to have you with us, Hrystyna, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Karen. It's such a great pleasure to be here and be able to present our work among this great set of papers. So, as you said, the paper is a joint work with my now former colleague, Gorgana. And what we are exploring in this paper is the following situation. I'll start with an example just to make it a little more understandable what we're looking at. So imagine we have a couple that gets married and they start contributing to a joint retirement account together. At the end of the year, when they have a meeting with their financial advisor, they receive information that they have made really good progress towards their retirement this year. The question then is what happens next. So when those two people, for example, Stephanie and Tim, have to make individual decisions, are they going to keep working toward their joint saving goal of retirement, or are they going to allow themselves to indulge and go on a shopping spree or go out with their friends, for example? So our research question is what happens in sequential decisions when couple relationship partners experience progress towards a previously defined joint goal. So we have succeeded together, now we have to make individual decisions. Do we keep going towards the joint goal, or do we allow ourselves to pursue other goals or indulgence in our individual decisions? So previous literature on sequential choices in individual goal pursuit has demonstrated that on one hand, we can see consistency, such that when people experience high goal progress, that tends to motivate them to keep going towards the same goal. But there is also a large literature that suggests that high goal progress actually liberates consumers to take goal inconsistent actions. And that usually happens due to a concept, to a boost to their self-concept. So our question is, but would the same licensing effect then emerge in joint goal pursuit? So what would happen if the progress is made in the context of a joint goal, and what is also the role of relationship power, which is an important relationship dynamic when you have these committed relationships. So first, what we argue is that when people are a part of a committed relationship, their self-concept is fundamentally reshaped in order to include their individual self-concept, or how we perceive ourselves as an individual, but also includes an additional relational self-concept, which is one's identity as a partner in the relationship. So now I'm a part of this relationship, I'm a part of a couple, and this becomes an important part of my self-concept. And previous research suggests that committed relationship partners actually tend to maintain equilibrium between these two different parts of the self-concept by shifting their time and efforts from one domain to the other once they perceive that they have made progress towards the individual or the relational identity. So for example, if you do something good as a relationship partner, you experience a boost toward your relational self-concept, and then that liberates you to focus on personal concerns, which could be individual goals or it could be indulgence. On the other hand, if you experience boost to your individual self-concept, now you have to shift your focus to pursuing relational concerns or pursuing goals, wants, needs that are important for the relationship and for your partner. So relationship power is a very important construct in close relationships. It's defined as the ability of one partner to make the majority of the decisions and also to control the outcomes and the joint outcomes and the other partner. Usually past research suggests that relationship power is often unequally distributed. So in most cases, we have one partner who dictates most of the joint decisions and makes most of the joint decisions. So that would be the partner with high relationship power. Research also suggests that high relationship power partners actually feel responsible for their partners, and they also feel responsible for any joint outcomes, both positive and negative. So if we take this research, what we argue is that for people who have high relationship power and they experience high progress towards a joint goal, they are more likely to attribute this joint goal progress to themselves, which would then give them a boost on their relational self-concept and liberate them to take actions that are inconsistent with the joint goal. So essentially what happens is after high joint goal progress, as compared to no or low goal progress, low power people are more likely to behave in a goal consistent manner, so they'll keep pursuing the joint goal, versus high relationship power people, they're more likely to experience a relational self-concept boost because they attribute the joint success to themselves, and they're more likely to then feel liberated or licensed to pursue individual concerns. So we tested our predictions in 11 experiments with a total of about 5,000 participants. We examined both real couples and lab-created dyads. We measured manipulated power. We also demonstrated that the effect is really specific to joint goal progress and relationship power. It doesn't occur with individual goal progress and individual power. And we also demonstrated process by mediation and process by moderation. In addition to that, we have secondary financial data that we obtained from a money management app that I'm going to talk a little bit about. And then we have 2 intervention studies that basically show us how we can elevate how we can help high relationship power partners to stay on track with the joint goal even after they experience high joint goal progress. So for the sake of time today, I'm going to focus on the more practically relevant data given the nature of the Paul Green Award. So I'm going to show you one experiment, a little bit about the financial data, and then one of the intervention studies. So in study 1, it was a simple study in which we manipulated joint goal progress, high versus low, and we measured relationship power. We recruited 100 married couples on at the campus of Boston College. These were employees at Boston College. We measured their relationship power using the following scale. So in your relationship, who has more power, you or your partner? And then I'll show you the manipulation of goal progress in a second, but the outcome measure was whether they're going to use the study payment to start a household emergency cash savings fund or contribute or contribute to one that they already have. Here is how we manipulated Go Progress here. We basically ask them to estimate their joint savings that they have accumulated so far as a household, and we varied the scale on which they estimated the savings. So for the low joint Go Progress, we created the scale such that everyone is pretty much likely to select the low point, which gives them the perception that they have made a low joint Go Progress. In the high joint Go Progress condition, we changed the scale or the points of the scale so that pretty much everyone selected the high point, which gives them perceptions of high joint Go Progress. And then what we saw is that if you look at the likelihood of contributing their study payment to starting an emergency cash fund, we see that for low relationship power people, there is no difference between the low and the high joint progress condition. But for high relationship power participants, we see that they were significantly less likely to contribute their payment to their saving decision in the high than the low progress condition. So the high joint Go Progress condition liberated them to disengage from the joint Go. In the next study that I'm going to show you, this is the field data that we obtained from a couple's money management mobile app. And of course, the data has a lot of limitations, but I thought it would be good to show it here just to demonstrate that the effects holds when we look at this objective real observational data, where we have access to the bank accounts of couples and we can examine their progress towards savings from one month to another and then look at their spending in the subsequent month. So first we had a user survey in which participants completed the measure of relationship power. It was the same measure that we used in study 1. And then we also had information about the balances as well as the transactions in all of the different accounts that the couples holds, either individually or jointly, between August and October 2018. So as a measure, and it's an imperfect measure of savings progress, of course, but what we did here is we looked at the difference between the couple's total savings between September and August. So higher numbers would indicate higher progress towards the savings goals. And as the div we looked at individual spending on an indulgence-related category, which in the app was titled shopping and fun spending category. So here we are going to look at the proportion of total spending that is spent on the shopping and fun spending category as the DV in the following month. So we're looking at how savings changed from September to August, and then in October we looked at the spending on indulgences for the individual couple members. What we find here is exactly the same effect as we saw in the earlier study that I showed you. We have an interaction of relationship power with the joint savings Go Progress, such that for partners with high relationship power, the higher the joint Go Progress was, the greater their subsequent indulgence spending was. And for low relationship power, again, the effect of joint Go Progress was not significant. In the next study, we wanted to test a possible intervention that would promote Go consistent actions among high relationship power consumers. So here we recruited benefit eligible merit Boston College employees, and we manipulated the brochure that they saw about a retirement savings plan, and we measured their relationship power. First, for everyone, we manipulated joint Go Progress with a retirement quiz. So everyone experienced high joint Go Progress. We told them that your progress towards your retirement is at the 90th percentile. So you're saving better than 90% of the American households who are in your age bracket. Then we manipulated the brochure such that in the control brochure, they saw just simple information about 403B retirement plan in Boston College. With a simple picture of a beach. And in the intervention brochure, it was designed to cue the salience of this relational concern. So we reasoned that if people experience a boost to their relational self-concept, the way that we can sort of counteract that would be to raise the importance of these relational concerns again via the brochure. So here, instead of the beach picture, we featured the beach with a couple so that we can make participants reading the brochure think more about their couple identity here. And this brochure was actually, the dependent variable was the likelihood of enrolling in the 403B contribution plan, or if they had already enrolled in that plan, likelihood of increasing their contribution. So what we see is that for low relationship power participants, there was no effect of the control versus the intervention brochure, but for the high relationship power participants, the intervention brochure successfully increased their likelihood of contributing to the retirement plan, such that it counteracted the effect of the high goal progress. And then just wanted to show you the results of the second intervention study, just to show you the intervention that we implemented there. Here we are trying to counteract the relational self-concept boost for high relationship power participants by giving them prompts to think about their partner's contributions to the joint goal rather than their own contributions. So people usually tend to think about their own contributions, and that allows high relationship power participants to sort of attribute the joint progress to themselves and experience this relational self-concept boost. So we reason that when we give them prompts to think about what your partner has contributed to the goal, that would sort of minimize the boost to the relational self-concept and attenuate the effect that we see. And that's exactly what we see. So here you can see for high relationship power participants, the low versus the high progress bars are what we saw in the previous study. So low progress, high progress bars sort of liberates them to disengage from the joint savings goal, so they're less likely to contribute to the joint savings goals. But once you implement the intervention in which you focus on the partner's contributions, that sort of counteracts the effect and elevates their likelihood of contributing to the joint savings goals to the same level as the low progress condition. So just briefly, the practical implications of the research. We find that only partners with high relationship power feel liberated to disengage from a joint goal after experiencing high joint goal progress. It's actually the low power partners that actually can aid joint goal pursuit. We also show that subtle intervention that either focus on the relational concerns, as we saw in the first brochure, or consideration of the partner's contribution of the joint goal can eliminate the licensing effects that we see for high relationship power individuals. And this is important for practitioners because we did a review of about 110 retirement plans, and we saw that only 15% of them featured a picture of a couple in their website, and only 3% used language that referred to the spouse in the plan description. So what our research suggests is that the effectiveness or consumers' progress towards retirement can be improved if all of these brochures and marketing materials that retirement plans use feature more language about the couple consideration and more language related to the partner, and that prompt consumers to think about the relational self-concept. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Christina. I'll just kind of give a minute to see if we have any questions pop up on chat or anyone wants to unmute. Really like that you're using kind of the different sources of data, right? So you're having some of those experiments, but you're also kind of highlighting that opportunity to have the data from the app, really highlighting, you know, the implications of this happening in the real world, kind of with real couples and not just in the lab. And of course, thinking about what those implications are in terms of practice and how we could change the current kind of communications that we have, maybe from these retirement companies encouraging investing to focus on the couples and the partnership of saving. Any questions from anyone? Yeah.
I have a question for you. So the low power, what if it's they aren't contributing? Is there still is there still opportunity to think about even if there's no contribution at all? Directly, like financial contribution?
Do you mean that they're not contributing to the goal financially?
Yeah.
So what is your question? If there is any opportunity for?
Like, does it still work to think, because I thought the idea was you're getting them to think about the low power person's contribution.
Oh, if that would still work even if the low power is not contributing. So we haven't looked at whether the actual contributions would matter for the intervention to hold. But that's an interesting question. So we can see if contributions to the goal in terms of their amount of savings, for example, as a percentage of their income, would moderate the effectiveness of the intervention. That's an interesting question. We haven't looked at that.
One question that kind of occurred to me is thinking, I don't know if this is what Mitch's question kind of stems from or not, and maybe I'm misinterpreting Mitch, but I'm wondering if like the idea of contributing, like, of course, you know, retirement savings, they would be like actually contributing financially, but it could be potentially construed, and maybe you looked at this already in the studies, but like as a partner, I'm contributing not financially with like my own earnings, but I'm contributing by maybe trying to save and cut, you know, my budget in other locations, like in other areas. And so that ultimately leads us to be able to save more. So I might not be making money and putting it in, but I'm contributing to the savings by not spending elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. So maybe that's why this intervention works more broadly, because you're prompting the person to think about any contributions that the other person is making to the goal. So it could be about them cutting spending or them getting information about savings plans and stuff like that, not necessarily on the financial contribution. So maybe that's why we see that this works broadly and might not be moderated by the actual contribution to the goal, because that allows people to sort of focus on what the other person is doing well.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Thank you for clarifying, Christina. I think I see in Mitch's comment too that kind of clarified for him. So even if it's someone, you know, one partner might be managing kind of the household and not making an external kind of income, but by maybe how they're, you know, engaging in other savings for the household, they're still contributing to the overall, and that's their contribution. So that's a very broad meaning of contribution, not limited to a financial contribution.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Excellent. Thank you. So I don't see any other questions. I'll give it just a few seconds here if anyone else wants to unmute and ask a question or raise their hand. All right, I'm going to go ahead and thank Christina again for sharing your interesting results with us. And I know everyone is busy, of course, but Christina, I really appreciate your time and being here with us today. And then our last presenter for this session, and thanks again to the 3 finalists, we have our winners of the Paul Green Award. Their article is Hype News Diffusion and Risk of Misinformation, the Oz Effect in Healthcare. And we're going to have June presenting on behalf of her co-authors. So June, if you'd like to share screen, and looks like you're good to go. So I'll turn it over to you. Thank you, June.
Okay, so I hope everyone can see my screen. And so thanks so much for the opportunity for us to present our research. And my co-authors, Xiao and Kanan, are also here today. And we're so honored to receive this award. So let me directly jump into the details of our research. So, so we know that healthcare information is some of the most frequently sought information on the internet nowadays. In fact, more than half of Americans search for health information online, and they want to check, for example, news articles, and they want to read research findings from scientific journals. They want to look at the online customer reviews, online discussion forums, and of course, doctors. Right? So nowadays, doctors not only sit in the hospitals, but they also appear on the internet and television, where they provide suggestions on medical issues. Although that we know that the publicly available information, health information, can be helpful, it can also be a source of incorrect or misleading information. And the rapid proliferation of the medical information in the public domain may pose a serious risk of harming consumers with erroneous or exaggerated claims. And I'm sure that many of us have encountered misinformation or misleading healthcare related information before, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic not too long ago. And this risk is especially high if an incorrect or poorly tested claim is advanced by a credible medical source. For example, doctors, right? So there's a celebrity physician, Dr. Oz, who often makes medical recommendations with limited or marginal scientific evidence for supplements that promise to burn fat or prevent cancers, which always leads to a surge in sales of those supplements or medical products. So motivated by these observations, in this paper, we look at this issue of hype news. So we define the hype news as information that is taken out of the context, exaggerated, and overgeneralized to attract public attention. And hype news is different from fake news. So fake news is the fabricated information that mimics news media content in form, but not in organizational process or intent of the legitimate news agencies. However, different from fake news, hype news is an insidious form of information distortion that cannot be easily eliminated. Okay, so in this paper, we address the following research questions. So we asked, do other information channels amplify or mitigate the bias in the hype news? And how does those hype news affect the information generated by other information channels? And what is the market response to hype news in terms of consumer search interest, product prices, and the number of product offerings? And in this study, we focus on over-the-counter weight loss products endorsed and promoted by the celebrity doctors like Dr. Oz in the form of hype news. And over-the-counter weight loss products offer a good context to study these issues because consumers make their own decisions without following physicians' prescriptions, and their choices are hugely affected by the publicly available health information. Okay, so we first collect extensive data from 4 channels for our analysis, which covers almost the entire spectrum of public health information. So the first source is the news articles from reputable media organizations who function as gatekeepers to protect consumers by providing information that can potentially de-bias the hype news. And the second source is the research articles from leading experts who can offer rigorous scientific information to counterbalance the inflated claims. And the third source is the online customer reviews on e-commerce platforms written by consumers who purchased a product and are motivated to help other consumers make more informed choices. And lastly, the source is the online product discussions, including consumers' shared opinions on online discussion forum, for example, Quora, and the social media like Facebook. So in our analysis, for each relevant content from each information source, we examine the language features by using traditional and also deep learning-based natural language processing techniques. And as a final and key step, we establish the causal impact of hype news on the other media sources using multiple causal inference methods. So here are our main findings. So we find that the legitimate news articles, one of the sources we look at, seem to amplify rather than rectify the misleading endorsement. So we find that the news outlets respond to the hype news by generating more related news articles and with an even higher sentiment. And also, which is concerning, is that the research articles react too slowly to mitigate this problem. And online customer reviews and product discussions provide only marginal corrections. And lastly, we find that the hype news leads to approximately 30% more customer search for the medical products, for the relevant medical products. And this tells us that, well, when hype news happens, it prompts consumers to search and seek more information. But unfortunately, the publicly available information is predominantly supportive of the biased information, and consequently, consumers may act on those hype news. Okay, so the findings from this research highlight a significant concern about the propagation and amplification of the misleading healthcare information. And this is driven by the celebrity endorsement, the hype news generated by them, and it is further fueled by news agencies and online customer activities. And this hype news phenomenon can lead consumers to make uninformed health decisions, potentially posing serious health risks. And our study also exposes the limitation of the current countermeasures, such as the research articles and customer reviews, which are unfortunately inadequate in rectifying those misinformation. So this research also provides critical insights for policymakers, healthcare professionals, and consumers. For policymakers, these findings underline the importance of effective regulation and oversight to mitigate the risk of cascading hype news. Meanwhile, it is worth noting that the oversight of hype news is actually challenging compared to fake news. Right? So first, we know that the hype news is harder to disprove, as there's a grain of truth in there, and it requires careful scientific studies, which is a costly exercise. And due to this reason, legal steps are less likely to apply to hype news compared to fake news. And moreover, with nowadays the explosion of the low-tier journal papers, studies that lack sound scientific evidence may get used. Results of some preliminary or small sample studies can be directly disseminated by endorsing celebrity doctors. So we think there's also implication for healthcare professionals, which can actually be useful and helpful to compensate for the lack of help from the current countermeasures. For example, they can it underscores the urgent need for healthcare professionals for their proactive engagement in public health discourse to counterbalance such misleading information. And consumers can also be more careful when they evaluate the health information. So our study serves as a reminder for them to go through some critical evaluation of this information, and especially those presented as endorsements by public figures. So the paper has already made a significant impact in both academia and the media in the fields of both medicine and marketing. For instance, it has attracted attention from notable scholars and media outlets such as the American Council on Science and Health. Its influence also extends to various ongoing marketing projects. And as part of the broader impact plan, we actually intend to distribute the findings to journalism schools. So we want to initiate some discussions with them on how joint efforts can be made to mitigate the diffusion or generation of the hype news. And we believe that this collaboration may involve the faculties or doctoral students, and eventually can help extend the study's influence into the journalism education. And we think that in the future, this research could potentially also offer some guidance on the emerging technology of generative AI, which may exacerbate the harm of hype news. So by generating content that appears to be genuine and authentic, generative AI could potentially amplify the spread and influence of the hype news. And then this makes its regulation and control even more complex. So given the increasing reliance of consumers on the public health information, we believe this paper's impact is expected to grow substantially in the future. And it actually calls for an urgent need for collaborative efforts among all stakeholders to mitigate the harmful effects of hype news. And it is anticipated that the paper's influence will extend to policy, practice, and consumer behavior, and hopefully can help shape how healthcare information is disseminated, received, and also acted upon in the future. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, June. Really, I think very important research, interesting, both distinguishing kind of the fake news versus the hype news, and just acknowledging, right, how important it is to discredit this because of that little grain of truth that's in there where it's not entirely fake, but just kind of blown up, taken out of context. And so I think really important to work in that area, and fantastic to see both where you've already had some impact and also your ideas to talk to journalism schools and consider kind of implications of AI when those little, hype factors are out there and how they might come up in AI even more, but losing more and more of the context around them as they would come up. So very interesting research, and I think a very important topic that sounds fantastic to continue making progress on. So thank you, June, and congratulations again to all of you on winning and also being as a finalist for our other 3 authors. Do we have any questions for June and her co-authors? Or we can also circle back. We have just under 10 minutes, I believe, remaining. If you have questions for the other papers, I know I mentioned one with Radna, but I think they were chatting, so you can see that. So there's any other questions for June or the other earlier papers? I guess you guys can be thinking of your questions, but I know we have our editor-in-chief, Rebecca Hamilton, with us on the call as well. And so, I saw some of this multi-method work coming across in these different papers, and I know that's something that Rebecca and our team would really like to see. Rebecca, would you like to say anything else? Happy to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for presenting your work. This is a great forum for us to share this work. And of course, it's been recorded, so we'll be able to disseminate further. And what I really like about all these papers is the multiple sources that you've brought together, and the really the variety that we see across these papers too. Some focusing on more consumer issues, some more strategy, and some more quantitative analyses. So, I think it really represents the best of JMR. So thank you.
But thank you, Rebecca. I guess, did any other questions pop up for anyone? Right. Maybe everyone is questioned out after a long day of virtual AMA potentially. So we can go ahead and give you maybe 5 minutes back of your time here. But I really do want to thank all of the authors again, and congratulate them as well for doing this important practical work that will have impact on practice as well. I do see a question here just popped up. June, I guess, do you think that your findings apply to other kinds of news, like potentially is there political hype news as well? So things outside of maybe the medical information area, do you see your findings applying there or not?
That's a great question. So, so first of all, because we didn't do analysis about the political news, so we cannot say for sure. But I believe there's some similarity between healthcare news and political news. But there's also difference in terms of how other channels may react to it. So, for example, I believe one of our sources is the customer reviews. So I believe that source is probably missing for studying political news, and also the news agencies may react differently to political news, and the scientific journals may not do much on political news, but maybe some social science scholars may do that. But I think political news, maybe there are more different counterbalancing, opinions popping up. So by different politicians, and but in the healthcare domain, so we observe that usually when one type of very celebrity doctors say certain things, and it seems like no much response from other professionals, and that's why we call for more engagement of healthcare professionals to join this discussion to counterbalance some hype news. So, but I think it's very interesting. Another study to do about political news. Yeah, so it's interesting topic to look at.
Thank you, June. Yeah, imagining the different kinds of counter kind of information that's popping up, and kind of maybe I don't want to say ease, but the extent to which information is objective, right? Like factually correct versus incorrect versus more opinion. I think in medical field, there's more kind of factual, this is correct or not correct, and these are the contexts in which it is correct or factual, and there might be more opinions, right, rather than factual information, although there are certainly facts in politics and many other domains. So, but interesting to think about other domains. Excellent. Well, thank you for that question, Mitch. And nothing else popping up. So yeah, just again, thank you all for being here. If any of you, are able to attend at Summer AMA in person, happy to see you there, and hope you have safe travels. For those of you not able to attend in person, really hope that you enjoyed this day at virtual AMA and got a lot out of it. And again, this has been recorded. So thank you all for being here. And again, congratulations to all of our finalists and our winner. Enjoy your afternoon or evening, morning.